In the Arizona territory, life was cheaper than a shot of whiskey, and honor was a word men killed for. A woman's future wasn't her own. It was a piece of property, bartered and sold. Josephine Bellwether was her father's finest property. The most powerful man in the territory, Jedediah Bellwether, had promised her to a monster. Her life was set in stone, but the desert has a way of breaking stones, and her destiny came in the form of an Apache warrior named Kale. It wasn't a word that changed her world. It wasn't a promise. It was a single touch. A moment that was never supposed to happen. A hand that caught her as she fell, and in doing so, shattered everything she'd ever known. That one touch started a fire. A love that stood against two worlds. And a war that would paint the canyons red with blood. The dust in Redemption Creek was a fine red powder. It got in your clothes, in your food, in your soul. For Josephine Bellwether, it was the dust of her prison. At 20, her spirit was as wild as the land itself, a problem her father, Jedediah, was determined to fix. Jedediah owned the sprawling BBB Ranch, the town mercantile, and the mortgages on half the people in the valley. He was a king, and Josephine was his jewel, proof that he could tame the wilderness. Her life was a perfectly crafted lie. Mornings were for household accounts. Afternoons were for piano tunes from back east. And evenings were for sitting beside the man she was supposed to marry, Sheriff Silas Kane. Kane was a man made of sun-baked earth and hard granite. His eyes were the color of a faded blue sky, with no warmth in them at all. They said he was a man of justice. But his justice was quick, and it looked a lot like revenge. Years back, an Apache raid had taken his wife and child. The grief had hollowed him out, leaving only a cold, burning hatred for the people he called savages. Jedediah figured Cain's iron will was the perfect tool to protect his empire, to protect his daughter. But when Cain put his hand on Josephine's arm, it felt like a shackle. "You seem distracted tonight, Josie." Cain's voice was like gravel, cutting through the song she was playing. The parlor was a cage of velvet and mahogany, a world away from the dust and heat outside. She lifted her fingers from the keys. "Just the heat, Silas. It drains the spirit." "The heat's a constant," he said, his eyes drifting toward the window, toward the dark line of the Dragoon Mountains. "Apache lands. Your father and I were just discussing a new patrol. They're getting bold." He paused. "Stockman from Miller's Pass was found yesterday." He said the next word like a death sentence. "Arrows." A knot tightened in Josephine's stomach. She knew the stories. Settlers breaking treaties, Apache retaliation, and then revenge from men like Cain. It was a bloody wheel, and she was being married to the man who turned it. She had to get out. She had to breathe. The next afternoon, she rode out alone. Her mare, Lyra, was the only one who knew her secrets. She spurred the horse west, away from the ranch, away from everything. She rode toward the broken country, where the creeks ran thin and the saguaros stood like lonely sentinels. This was her only rebellion, a small, desperate gasp for air. She was flying through a shallow arroyo, lost in the rhythm, when the world turned upside down. A rattlesnake, the color of the earth, struck at Lyra's leg. The horse screamed, a sound of pure terror, and reared up with a force that threw Josephine from the saddle. Time slowed down. She saw the ground rushing to meet her. She saw the spiny cholla cactus waiting like a bed of nails. Her life didn't flash before her eyes. There was just one thought. This is how it ends. Then he was there. He didn't walk into the scene. He separated from it, like a shadow detaching from a rock. One moment, nothing. The next, a figure of lean muscle and sun-darkened skin stood between her and the hard ground. He caught her. It was impossible. His one hand locked around her waist, solid as oak. His other cupped the back of her head, saving her skull from a jagged stone she hadn't even seen. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs. For a single heartbeat, she hung suspended between a violent death and an absolute stunning stillness. Her cheek was pressed against his buckskin shirt. She could feel the heat of his body, smell the wild scent of desert sage. She lifted her eyes. They were the darkest she had ever seen. And in their depths, she saw not the savagery Cain always talked about, but a startling, powerful calm. He was Apache, the high cheekbones, the line of his jaw, the single hawk feather in his long black hair. It was unmistakable. His fingers were still tangled in her hair. His arm was a band of steel around her. And it was this touch, this one single moment, that broke her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't romantic. It was real. A pure, undeniable truth in her life of suffocating lies. It spoke of strength without cruelty, of presence without possession. In that one silent moment, something was forged. A spark jumped across the chasm between their two worlds, worlds that were supposed to be at war. He gently lowered her to her feet. His eyes flickered to the panicked mare, then back to her. He spoke no words. He didn't need to. His eyes asked if she was hurt. She could only shake her head, her throat too tight to speak. He turned, retrieved her fallen hat, and dusted it off. He held it out to her. As her fingers brushed his, the spark returned, a jolt that went straight to her soul. Then as silently as he appeared, he was gone, melting back into the rocks and shadows. Leaving Josephine standing alone in the deafening quiet, her entire world terrifyingly, irrevocably changed. She returned to the ranch in a daze. The encounter played over and over in her mind, a fever dream she couldn't shake. She made up a lie about a stumble, leaving out the snake, the fall, and the man who had caught her. But the truth was branded on her skin. The memory of his touch was a ghost that followed her everywhere. It made Sheriff Kane's attentions feel like a violation. A week later, her father threw a dinner to announce the engagement. Kane gave her a necklace, a heavy piece of silver and turquoise. It felt cold against her collarbone. "A man ought to adorn his finest possession," her father boomed, raising a glass of whiskey. Kane leaned in close, his breath smelling of stale tobacco. "Every man in this valley will know you belong to me, Josephine." His words were meant to be a promise. They felt like a life sentence. Her mind fled the stuffy parlor, back to the arroyo, back to the Apache's hands, hands that had saved her, not as a possession, but as a life. A reckless need took hold of her. She had to see him again. It wasn't a choice. It was a compulsion. She rode out every day, telling herself it was to exercise Lyra. But her path always led back to the same sun-scorched wash. She left small, foolish things. A blue ribbon from her hair, tied to a mesquite branch. A perfect quartz stone placed on the rock where he had steadied her. They were messages cast into the wilderness, with no promise they'd be received. For days the offerings vanished, but he never appeared. She started to think she'd imagined him, a phantom conjured by the desert heat. Then on the fourth day, just as she was about to give up, she saw him. He was perched on a high rock formation, watching her. His form was so still he was almost part of the stone. He wasn't hiding. He was just there. As her eyes met his, he descended the rock with the grace of a mountain lion. He stopped a respectful distance away. "You are the rancher's daughter," he said. His voice was deeper than she remembered. His English was clear, precise. "You speak my language," she breathed. A flicker of something, maybe amusement, crossed his face. "To know your enemy, you must know his tongue. My name is Cale. I am Josephine Bellwether." "I know," he said simply. "It is not safe for you here." "Why did you help me?" she asked, the question that had kept her awake for nights. Cale's dark eyes held hers. "I saw a life in danger. The snake does not care whose daughter you are." It was the most honest thing anyone had ever said to her. In her world, every action was a calculation for land, or power, or advantage. His motive was as clean as the desert sky. From that day on, the arroyo became their world. Their meetings were stolen moments, heavy with the danger of discovery. He told her he was Chiricahua, that his people had been driven from their lands. He spoke of a world guided by seasons and spirits, where the earth was a mother, not something to be bought and sold. She told him of her life, of the books she read in secret, of the cold dread she felt about her future with Silas Kane. She spoke with a freedom she'd never known. One hot afternoon, she found him tending to a long, clean slice on his forearm. "What happened?" she asked, her heart jumping. "A disagreement with a cougar over a water source," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. He was trying to bind it, his movements awkward. Without thinking, she dismounted. Let me. Her fingers trembled as she took his arm. His skin was warm, the muscle beneath it hard as rock. She carefully cleaned the cut with water from her canteen and wrapped it with her own handkerchief. He watched her, his expression unreadable. When she finished, she looked up. His face was inches from hers. The air grew thick, charged with a current stronger than words. His gaze dropped to her lips. She saw the rigid control in his jaw, the war being fought inside him. She felt the same war in her own chest. A lifetime of rules against the undeniable truth of her heart. He leaned in slowly. She closed her eyes. His lips brushed hers, hesitant at first, then with a deep, searching pressure that spoke of a loneliness as profound as her own. It was a kiss of stolen time, of impossible yearning. When they broke apart, the world had been remade. The line had been crossed, and they didn't see the man watching from the ridge above, a lone rider from the BBB ranch, sent by a suspicious Sheriff Kane. His name was Jeb Coulter, and he spurred his horse back toward Redemption Creek, carrying the spark that would ignite a firestorm. Jeb Coulter didn't go to Jedediah Bellwether. His loyalty and the cruel pleasure of the news belonged to Silas Kane. He found the sheriff on the porch of the jailhouse, oiling his Colt Peacemaker. Jeb, his face slick with sweat, told the story with lurid detail. Saw it with my own eyes, Sheriff. Kissing him, an Apache buck, right out there in Crying Woman Wash. The cylinder of the Colt clicked shut, a sound of final, metallic coldness. Kane didn't move, but his eyes changed. The washed-out blue seemed to freeze over, becoming chips of ice. The hatred he held for the Apache now had a name. It had a face. Get Deputy Miller. Kane's voice was terrifyingly calm. Gather a posse. 10 men. Good trackers. Be ready to ride in an hour. What's the charge, Sheriff? Jeb asked, eager for the violence. Kane looked up, and for the first time, a cruel smile twisted his lips. Abduction, he said. The savage has taken my fiancée. We're going to get her back. The lie was perfect. It turned Josephine into a victim and Cale into a monster. It gave Kane the excuse he needed to unleash his rage, not just on Cale, but on any of his people who got in the way. The posse rode first to the Bellwether Ranch. Kane strode into the parlor, his spurs ringing on the polished floor. Jedediah was at the bar, whiskey in hand. Silas, what is this? Worse than a ghost, Jedediah, Kane snarled. Your daughter has been taken by an Apache. The color drained from Jedediah's face. The whiskey glass shattered on the floor. His daughter, his legacy, defiled by a savage. The shame was a physical blow, followed by a surge of pure fury. Taken? Are you sure? My man saw it, dragged her out into the wilderness. God knows what he's doing to her. Kane fanned the flames, watching the fire grow in Jedediah's eyes. My posse is ready. We'll bring her back, and we'll hang the animal who took her from the highest cottonwood we can find. Jedediah, blinded by rage, never questioned it. It was easier to believe his daughter was a victim than to accept she had chosen to defy him. Find her, Silas, he commanded, his voice trembling. Find her, and bring me the scalp of the man who did this. Josephine returned home, the kiss still on her lips, unaware of the storm she had just unleashed. Her future with Kane was no longer a certainty. It was a prison she had to escape. The question was how. The answer came with the setting sun. A small, smooth stone arched through her open bedroom window, landing softly on the rug. A signal. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She looked out. She saw a shadow near the stables. Cale. She slipped out of the house and found him in the darkness behind the water trough. His face was grim. You must not meet me in the arroyo again, he said, his voice low and intense. You were seen. The bottom fell out of her world. Seen? By who? A rider from your ranch. He went straight to the man with the silver star. They are coming, not just for me. They will use this as an excuse. They will call it an abduction. They will ride against my people. Her beautiful, dangerous secret was about to become the reason for a massacre. Silas, he'll kill you. He will try, Cale said, his jaw tight. I came to warn you and to give you a choice. He looked at her, his dark eyes searching her face. They will come for you. They will say you are a victim. They will lock you away, marry you to him, and you will live in that house a prisoner until your spirit dies. That is one path. He paused. The other is with me. We ride tonight, into the mountains where they will not easily follow. It will be a hard life. You will have nothing you have now. You will be hunted, an outcast from your world forever, but you will be free. It was the ultimate choice, the gilded cage, or the terrifying freedom of the wilderness at his side. There was no time to think. She looked at the dark silhouette of her father's house, a monument to her imprisonment. Then she looked at the face of the man who had shown her what it felt like to be alive, the memory of his touch, the honesty in his eyes, the taste of his kiss. It was the only truth she had left. My horse is in the stable, she whispered, her voice shaking but firm. Give me 5 minutes. A flicker of relief crossed his eyes. He nodded, then melted back into the shadows. Josephine moved through the house like a ghost. She didn't take jewels or money. She took her brother's old riding boots, a canteen, a warm blanket, and a small book of poetry. Tools for survival. As she led Lyra from the stable, she could hear the posse gathering in town. A murmur of angry voices, the jingle of harnesses, the sound of the war they were starting. She met Cale at the edge of the property. He was waiting with his own paint horse. Without a word, he took Lyra's reins, leading them away from the trail and into the labyrinth of canyons that marked the beginning of his world. Josephine glanced back one last time. The lights of the BBB ranch were like dying embers in the dark. It had been her entire world. Now it was just the past. Ahead, there was only darkness, the silhouette of Cale, and a terrifying, exhilarating unknown. She was no longer Jedediah Bellwether's daughter. She was no longer Silas Kane's fiancée. She was a fugitive, and she was free. The desert was a brutal teacher. The first days of their flight were a blur of exhaustion and fear. Cale pushed them without mercy. He chose paths that no horse should be able to travel, scaling rock faces and squeezing through narrow canyons that scraped their legs raw. They rode by the light of the moon to avoid the sun's punishing glare. Josephine's body screamed in protest. Her muscles burned with a fire she'd never known. Her hands, once soft from playing the piano, were now raw and calloused from gripping Lyra's reins. But with every painful mile, something inside her woke up. She learned to read the desert. Cale taught her how to find water from the roots of a certain bush, how to tell the track of a deer from a mountain lion. He never offered praise. But when she found a patch of edible prickly pear fruit on her own, the small nod he gave her was worth more than any compliment she'd ever received. One night, huddled by a smokeless fire in a hidden cave, she watched him sharpen an arrowhead. "Do you ever miss your old life?" she asked softly. He didn't look up. "My life is with my people. This is not life. It is survival, but it is a life with purpose. Did you have a purpose in your father's house?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Her purpose had been to be a pretty possession, to be married off. "No," she admitted. "I had no purpose at all." He finally looked at her, his dark eyes reflecting the stars. "Now you do," he said. "To live." But they weren't just being hunted by a posse anymore. Sheriff Kane had sent a rider to Fort Huachuca. He hired the one man in the territory who might be able to outthink an Apache, a disgraced Army scout named Flint. Flint was a wiry man with a face like tanned leather and eyes that missed nothing. He arrived at the posse's camp riding a mule that looked as tough as he was. He studied the tracks Cale and Josephine left behind. Where Kane saw a confusing jumble, Flint saw a story. "He's clever, this one," Flint said, spitting tobacco juice, "using the rock to hide his trail. But he's got the woman with him. She ain't used to this. Her horse is leaving signs he can't erase." Flint pointed to a tiny scuff mark on a rock. "Her mare is shod. The Apache's is not. He's heading for the Chiricahua Mountains. He'll try to circle through Sulphur Springs Valley first, to find water and throw us off." Flint's eyes narrowed. "We don't follow him. We ride to the mouth of the valley, and we wait." Kane felt a surge of savage joy. The net was closing. 3 days later, Cale and Josephine led their exhausted horses through a narrow pass. It opened into the wide, grassy expanse of the valley. Suddenly, Cale froze. He held up a hand. Josephine followed his gaze. Far in the distance, a plume of dust rose into the morning sky. Then another appeared to the east. "They've cut us off," Cale said, his voice grim. "They predicted our path." Cold panic seized Josephine. They were trapped in the open. There was nowhere to run. "What do we do?" she cried. Cale's eyes scanned the terrain. He pointed to a jagged, broken-tooth peak that rose from the valley floor. "We climb," he said. "The horses can't make it, but men on foot will be slower. It's our only chance." They abandoned their horses, a heartbreaking necessity. Cale slapped Lyra's flank, sending her galloping away as a decoy. They scrambled up the scree slope, their lungs burning. Below, they could hear the shouts of the posse as they found the horses. They climbed for hours under the merciless sun. Finally, they found refuge in a small, windswept cave just below the summit. From there, they could see the posse spreading out below, tiny figures searching the base of the mountain. They were pinned down. No food. Only the water left in their canteens. It was just a matter of time. As night fell, they watched the campfires of the posse flicker to life below. Shivering in the cold mountain air, Josephine huddled next to Cale for warmth. The fear had faded, replaced by a strange, fatalistic calm. "They will find us in the morning," she said, her voice flat. "Yes," Cale agreed. She turned to look at him, his profile carved by the moonlight. "I'm not sorry I came with you." He turned to face her. In the pale light, she saw the deep emotion in his eyes. He reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. His calloused fingers were surprisingly gentle. "Nor am I," he said. He leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't the desperate passion of their first kiss. It was a deep, profound tenderness. A kiss that acknowledged the end might be near. But in that moment, they found a final, defiant peace. The war was waiting for them at the bottom of the mountain. But for one night, they had found their own fragile heaven. Waiting for the end, however, wasn't in Cale's nature. Before the first rays of sun touched the horizon, he was moving. "They expect us to stay pinned," he whispered, "or go down the way we came. We will do neither." He led her to the far side of the peak. It was a sheer cliff face that dropped hundreds of feet to a jagged mess of boulders. Josephine's stomach turned. "We can't go down there." "Not down," Cale corrected, pointing sideways. "Across." He was pointing to a narrow ledge, barely a foot wide, that snaked its way around the face of the mountain. A path for goats, not people. But looking down at the posse beginning to stir, she knew it was their only hope. The crossing was the most terrifying experience of her life. With their backs pressed to the cold stone, their boots inches from a deadly fall, they moved with agonizing slowness. Cale went first, his low voice a constant encouragement. "Do not look down. Trust the rock. One step at a time." Josephine followed, her entire world shrinking to the few inches of stone in front of her. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. She put her trust in him, and in the surprising strength of her own trembling legs. Hours later, shaking and drenched in sweat, they reached the other side. They had bypassed the posse completely. By midday, they were back on the valley floor, miles from their pursuers. For 2 more days, they traveled on foot, slowed by hunger and exhaustion, until they finally reached the foothills of the Chiricahua Mountains. Here, nestled in a hidden valley, was Cale's village. It wasn't a large settlement, just a collection of domed huts, camouflaged so perfectly they were nearly invisible. But there were no joyous greetings. The faces that turned to them were gaunt and tired. An elder named Tassa met them. His eyes flickered to Josephine with suspicion and contempt. The entire village held its breath. Women and children peered from their doorways, their faces hostile. She was the enemy. One woman, whose husband had been killed by soldiers, spat at Cale in broken English. "You bring a white woman here? Is her touch worth the lives of our children when the soldiers follow?" "She is with me," Cale stated, his voice ringing with an authority that silenced the argument, but not the resentment. Life in the village was hard. Food was scarce. The game had been thinned out by the ranchers. Josephine tried to help, but her efforts were clumsy. She didn't know how to grind mesquite beans or tan a deer hide. She was a liability. The only kindness came from an old blind woman, the widow of a great warrior. She saw past Josephine's white skin and set her to mending clothes, a task her hands were suited for. Here among his people, Josephine saw a new side of Cale. He was a leader, settling disputes, organizing hunts, giving his own small share of food to families with children. The weight of his responsibility was immense, but another danger was growing in the camp. A warrior named Nasha watched Cale and Josephine with a cold, calculating eye. He had seen too much death, too much starvation. He believed the fight was lost. He argued that their only hope was to surrender, to accept the white man's peace. Cale argued against him, speaking of freedom, of fighting for their home. Most of the warriors sided with Cale. Nasha saw this as foolish pride. He saw Josephine as the catalyst that would bring their final destruction. He believed that Sheriff Kane wanted only two people, Cale and the white woman. He made a terrible secret calculation. If he delivered them to the sheriff, perhaps the rest of his people would be spared. It was a traitor's logic, born of pure despair. One night, Nasha slipped away from the village. He rode hard for 2 days, back toward the lands they had fled. He knew the posse would still be searching. He left a trail, a series of deliberately broken branches, a trail that a scout as skilled as Flint could not fail to understand. It was a signal, an invitation pointing directly to the hidden valley. The betrayal was complete. Days later, Flint, scouting ahead of the posse, found the first broken branch. "He made a mistake," another man said. Flint dismounted, examining the clean break. He looked ahead and saw another, 100 yards on. "That's no mistake," he said, a grim smile on his lips. "That's an invitation." The attack came in the dead silent hour just before dawn. Guided by Nash's trail, Kane and the posse had surrounded the valley. They didn't charge. Kane was more cunning than that. The first shot was a statement. A lone Apache hunter leaving the village was shot from his horse. The single sharp crack echoed through the canyon like a breaking bone. The village erupted into chaos. Warriors grabbed their rifles. Women herded terrified children into the wickiups. Cale emerged from his dwelling, his face a mask of grim understanding. They had been found. "To the rocks!" he commanded, his voice cutting through the panic. The handful of Apache warriors, outnumbered and outgunned, scrambled for cover. The air filled with the crackle of gunfire. Josephine huddled with the old blind woman and a group of children behind a thick stone outcrop. "The hawk has found the nest," the old woman said, her voice a low rasp. Josephine saw Nayland, the woman who despised her, get struck in the arm by a ricocheting bullet as she tried to save her son. Without a second thought, Josephine tore a strip from her petticoat and scrambled to her side, pressing the bandage against the wound. Nayland stared at her, her eyes wide with shock, the hatred forgotten. The battle raged for hours. Cale moved among his warriors like a phantom, his rifle barking defiance. But he knew it was a battle they couldn't win. From his perch, Silas Kane watched with cold patience. He didn't just want to wipe out the village, he wanted his prize. "Flint," he ordered, "take 3 men, circle around to the west. There's a game trail. Get behind them. We'll crush them between us." As Flint and his men slipped away, Nasha watched from among the warriors. The full weight of his betrayal crashed down on him. He had expected Kane to offer terms, to demand Cale's surrender. He had not expected this slaughter. He saw the terror on the children's faces. He saw Nayland's blood staining the earth. And he realized his catastrophic mistake. Kane wouldn't spare anyone. The sheriff didn't want peace. He wanted extermination. Soul-shattering guilt seized him. He looked at Cale, fighting fiercely for the lives of his people. Nasha knew he couldn't undo what he had done. But maybe he could change the final bloody chapter. He saw Flint's men disappear into the brush. He knew the trail they were taking. It led to an unstable cliff overlooking the canyon's only escape route. He crawled to Cale. "They are flanking us from the west," he yelled over the gunfire. "You must take the women and children and flee through the lower wash. I will hold them off." Cale looked at him, suspicion warring with desperate need. But there was a new light in Nasha's eyes, the light of atonement. "Go," Nasha urged. "For the people." Cale made the decision. He gave the order to retreat. Josephine helped the wounded Nayland and her son, practically carrying the boy as they ran. But Nasha and 2 loyal warriors did not retreat. They charged upwards toward the high cliffs, directly into the path of Flint's flanking party. It was a suicide run, a diversion. Kane and his men concentrated their fire on the three warriors, buying Cale and the others precious minutes. They reached the narrow wash, a deep scar in the earth that would shield them from the posse's fire. High above, Nasha reached the unstable cliff edge just as Flint's men closed in. He was shot twice but did not stop. He and his two dying companions heaved against a series of large, precariously balanced boulders. With a deep groan, the largest rock tilted. It triggered a cascade, a thundering avalanche of stone and earth that poured down the mountainside, completely blocking the pass. When the dust settled, the path was gone, buried under tons of rubble, and Nasha and his companions were gone with it. Down below, Kane let out a roar of pure fury. His prey had escaped. The siege was broken. Days later, deep in the Dragoon Mountains, the small band of survivors made a new camp. Their numbers were halved, their spirits broken, but they were alive. Josephine, no longer an outcast but a fellow survivor, tended to the wounded. That evening, Cale stood with her on a precipice, looking out over the vast, unforgiving land. The war was not over. Silas Kane was still out there, his hatred honed to a razor's edge. But as Cale took her hand, his touch was no longer just a spark. It was a promise. A promise of a future they would face together. They had lost almost everything. But in the heart of the firestorm they had awakened, they still had each other. But their story doesn't end there, in the quiet of the mountains. Back in Redemption Creek, Jedediah Bellwether was a man consumed by doubt. Kane's story didn't add up. He found a half-written letter in Josephine's room, a letter confessing her love for a stranger, a plan to run away. She hadn't been taken. She had chosen. Armed with this proof, Jedediah confronted the sheriff. He found Kane in the jailhouse, cleaning his guns, the same cold look in his eyes. He showed him the letter, and in that moment, Silas Kane knew he was cornered. There was a struggle. A single gunshot echoed through the empty street. Kane walked out, telling his deputy that Jedediah, mad with grief, had taken his own life. The lie was perfect. And now, with Jedediah gone, his entire empire, the ranch, the town, everything was under the control of the man who was supposed to be his son-in-law. Sheriff Silas Kane was now the king. News of Jedediah's death traveled on the wind, reaching the hidden Apache camp. It was brought by a sympathetic prospector who traded with them. When Cale told Josephine, she didn't cry. A cold, hard resolve settled over her. She knew her father. He would never have given up. He would never have surrendered to despair. She knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that Silas Kane had murdered him. They couldn't run forever. Kane wouldn't stop until they were dead. And now he had her father's blood on his hands. They had to go back, not to surrender, to deliver justice. But they weren't alone. Flint the scout had seen the whole thing. He'd seen Jedediah go into the jailhouse. He'd heard the shot, and he'd seen the cold, triumphant look on Kane's face afterward. Flint had been a part of many terrible things, but this was a line he wouldn't cross. He disappeared from the posse, melting into the desert. He found them. He found Cale and Josephine, and he told them everything. He told them something else, too. The truth about Kane's first family. It wasn't an Apache raid that killed them. It was a fever. A fever Kane was too proud and too hateful to get help for from the very people who knew the desert cures. His family died because of his own stubborn pride. His entire war was built on a lie. The final showdown wasn't a battle in the mountains. It was a reckoning in the dusty streets of Redemption Creek. With Flint's help, Cale and Josephine slipped back into the town they had fled. They didn't come with guns blazing. They came with the truth. They went straight to the U.S. Marshal, who was in town on other business, a man who already had his suspicions about Sheriff Kane's sudden rise to power. They told him everything: the fake abduction, the murder of Jedediah, and Flint, the star witness, confirmed it all, adding the final damning truth about Kane's past. Silas Kane was arrested in the middle of the saloon, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. The empire he had killed for crumbled to dust. Justice had come to Redemption Creek. Josephine inherited her father's ranch, but she didn't stay. She sold it, using the money to help Kale's people secure a protected stretch of their ancestral lands, a small piece of the world that was rightfully theirs. Their love story became a legend, a whispered tale of defiance in an era of brutality, a testament to the fact that even in the harshest wilderness, the human heart is the most untamable territory of all. They chose love, and in doing so, they ended the war that a single touch had awakened. What do you think happened to them next? Did they find a true and lasting peace, or did the ghosts of their past continue to haunt them? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of love, betrayal, and survival in the Old West captured your imagination, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who loves a classic Western tale. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next story from the forgotten pages of history. Thanks for listening.